Deleted session. April 13, 1981. Good evening. Now we will take this gently. Rupert's mother often told him she wished the birth had not taken place, and that Rupert had not been born. She let Rupert know that she wanted a boy, a son, rather than a daughter to begin with. So Rupert felt that he was certainly a disappointment, to say the least. He was made to feel often that he was at least strongly responsible for his mother's illness. It was also true that on other occasions his mother apologized for such statements, but the statements, of course, were highly charged and emotional, while the apologies were relatively prosaic. Rupert's mother chose her own life. She did then obviously decide to have a child, abortions or no, for in this case they did not work. She and Rupert chose a relationship that would terminate, so the two would go their separate ways. His mother actually found in the nursing homes a certain kind of comradeship. She was always involved in the politics of such institutions. Rupert's background found its own relative uniqueness. The household was charred. Give us a moment. Rupert picked that background because it afforded certain opportunities. Those opportunities involved emotional understanding, a very close and emotional contact with a particular belief system, and a first-hand view of a certain kind of reality structure. It also allowed for the emergence of creativity. In a fashion, it presented a kind of concentrated learning course. Rupert has changed in many ways, but throughout Marie's life, Marie changed relatively little. That is, any change was well with a certain recognizable scale. Why should anyone choose that kind of a lifetime? That was one of many questions that Rupert had slated for himself. Where did that kind of belief system end up? How could it be altered or adjusted or rearranged to suit the needs of his own generation? Or had it served all of its purposes? What were its benefits as well as its unfortunate aspects? How did creativity operate under such conditions? Now, to some extent, each person tests the nature of reality in each life for himself or herself, and also for the entire generation. How can life be made better? So, all of that was a portion of Rupert's challenge. Marie's purposes were her own, but the two obviously embarked on a relationship together, knowing that it would go so far and be relatively unsatisfactory. As I stated before, Rupert was not responsible for his mother's illness, the breakup of her marriage, the death of his grandmother and housekeeper, and had he had brothers or sisters, for example, they would have reacted in their own fashions to Marie's behavior. Rupert had been put in the Protestant day camp for an unfortunate short summer following the grandmother's death, and later into the Catholic home for a more protracted period of time. To some extent, he thought of that as punishment, of course, of being abandoned, forced to take charity as well, and the home reinforced all of the Catholic beliefs, partly stressing the sinfulness of the body. Remember, for example, the bathing episodes. There was no distinction made. To be sinful was, of course, to be a sinner, and in that home there was no time to foster any kind of independence. The children had to follow strict schedules, toe the mark. He spent a good deal of time on his knees then, doing penance when he did not fit into that structure. If he looked into a mirror and was caught at it, he was then caught in the sin of pride. When he wet the bed in the 4th grade night after night, The act was characterized as dirty. When he wrote the letters to his mother, they were censored. The nuns told him that he must say he was happy, whether or not he was. By the time he returned home, he was quite rigid and moralistic. On the other hand, for the time being, he had a very secure belief system against which for quite a full number of years he could taste his own mental, emotional, and spiritual vigor. He used dogma in a mystical manner, only to discover, however, that the church's mysticism had no place to go. It was in its fashion that ended. It squashed creativity unless that creativity called under dogma. In that background, Ruber saw firsthand an example of many of the most unfortunate issues with which we have been presently concerned, to at least some extent, as he followed his mother's adventures through the medical system, for example, through the aware process. Marie was also a woman living without a man for many years. She was a strong personality. She lived in a relative tumultuous emotional climate, provided with one kind of emotional excitement or another all the while. In a large manner, however, Marie's daughter was always somewhat now on the periphery of Marie's life, and not at its center. To whatever degree anyone ever was at its center. To whatever degree anyone ever was at its center, there was, even though they had not seen each other for years. Marie did not hate Ruber, though at times she could be quite hateful in her expressions. She was primarily bitter, and that bitterness lashed out at anyone, with Ruber the nearest target. Her late illness, while painful, was not a long lingering one. Ruber need not blame himself for not attending Marie's death. The emotional situation did not lean in that direction. They had parted too many years before. It was as if Marie were saying, "This is the kind of a life those beliefs can create. Now you go out and see what you can do to change it." Those events also added high drama, rich content, and provided unique creative material. Even in that background and with Marie's behavior, Ruber received a grounding in poetry, you see. His mother tried her writing. It would never have occurred to your mother to try short stories. The priests introduced good music, poetry, and a high educational background, even if it was a limited, distorted framework. Father Trainer provided some kindliness, compassion, and goodwill as he tried to translate Catholic dogma to Ruber's rebellious mind. He tried to restrain Marie in her expressions of bitterness. Marie also found peripheral relationships throughout later life, with nurses or attendants who turned into friends, and while her life certainly was not a happy one, it was not as tragic as it now seems to Ruber to have been, so that the beneficial elements of that early background were used without quarreling, of course. The unbeneficial elements were also used, many with quite creative results. Some of those unfortunate conditions, however, or questions remained unresolved, and it is with those you are contending. They end up neatly summarized in the concept of the sinful self, a self so sinful that its own body had to be hidden from itself while it washed. Ruber's grandmother taught him to sleep with his hands above the coverlets, so that the child would not even begin subconsciously to feel its own parts while it slept. The sinful self then became very alert. How could it tread its own works if it were so indelibly tainted? Worse, its questions were largely ignored, so that its panic grew. Another portion of the self seemed to be initiating an entirely different system of reality, in complete opposition to that early background, and the sinful self was bound to react with some alarm. It is already beginning to change its views. It wanted the communication to begin with. In the meantime, Ruber felt because of those beliefs. To some extent now, I am simplifying that he could not do enough, produce enough, help himself or others enough, that he could not satisfy you enough in many areas, because he felt he was so flawed to begin with. Therefore, he did not deserve love and would have to work for it or plead for it. So such attitudes were reflected and kept him from even appreciating his own work. All such matters will be covered. That is enough for this evening, since you read Sessions today also. You should be quite encouraged, however, by Ruber's responses of late. Russ said yes. They said, and I bid you a fond good evening. Since you read Sessions today also, you should be quite encouraged, however, by Ruber's responses of late. Russ said yes. They said, and I bid you a fond good evening. Russ said, thank you very much, says